Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi R.A. Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to you with another edition of this week's online Parsha class. I'm so happy you can join us as we discuss Parashat Emor for this Shabbat. And this Shabbat, or this Parsha, in many ways deals with many rules regarding the priests in terms of who they're able to marry, what they're able to do, and in particular, what we're going to take a look at is the extent to which they can perform their duties if there are other factors in play, and particularly whether or not they have any kind of physical defect. And I think that this is a very important question for us because in 2014, and thinking about how we want to be open and accepting to all different kinds of people who have been ostracized throughout history, that one of the most important groups that sometimes gets forgotten are people who are disabled, whether that's some physical injury, some mental injuries, or just things that people are born with or develop later on in life, and to what extent do we create welcoming places for people who have disabilities. And as such, we're going to turn to our Torah to see what it has to teach us about the disabled. And we're going to only look at one particular verse before we get to some commentary. This verse comes from Leviticus chapter 21, verse 17. And it says, Daber el Aharon lemor, speak unto Aaron and say thus, Ish mizaracha ledorotam, a person who comes from your seed for all generations, asher yihyev vomum, whoever has some kind of defect, lo yikrav, he shall not come close, lehakriv lechem Elohav, to sacrifice or to offer the bread of God. Meaning that anyone who has this kind of physical defect, it doesn't necessarily lay out exactly what those defects are, is not able to come before the priest, is not able to come before God and to make any kind of offering. So just from the outset here, just from the text in and of itself, we have a teaching that says that there are differentiations between those who are disabled and those who do not have any kind of disabilities whatsoever. And in particular, when it comes to the priests, that the idea seems to be that the priests are supposed to be the highest representative of the people to God, meaning it's not only that people who do not have defects are unable to go to priests, but no one, unless they are part of this clan, is able to come close to God through the giving of offerings. And as such, these people who come to this level need to be in a certain kind of, you can call it, quality, so that they are ones who do not cause themselves to become blemished in other different ways, such as defiling themselves by touching the dead, which is where we get the very popular notion that priests are not able to go into cemeteries. And yet, that kind of notion that there are these blemishes, these defects, which cause us to lessen our status, is one that it is very troublesome. In many ways, it from the context of the Torah and the time in which it was written, it makes sense that if you had a defect, that it would be considered as being someone who has been lessened in the eyes of God. And in fact, one of the pieces of language that is used by the commentary that we're going to take a look at is a comment by a rabbi who is known as the Shla, Rabbi David Horowitz, who was a great Jewish thinker and wrote on many different kinds of topics, that when he first talks about this issue that we're going to take a look at, he basically uses the language of someone who has been struck by midat hadin, who has been struck by the aspect of justice and whose limbs have fallen off, zro'otav naflu, as to say that our blemishes, whether it be physical or mental, are in many ways caused by God, and as such have pained us, and or put another way, that we feel the pain associated with God afflicting us. And that kind of language, which is embedded within part of the rabbis, can make it very difficult for us to understand how we can be accepting of those who are disabled. And as such, to look at our Jewish text and to kind of see what kind of wisdom it has, we have to really grapple with this notion that seems to be started in the Torah, that those who are blemished are either not perfect in the eyes of God, and are different in a negative way than those who are not blemished. So we're going to take a look at a commentary which I think tries to understand this issue in a bit of a different light. And so we now turn to the Shla. And I'm sorry, this is actually from, I believe it's from his son, the son of the Shla, in a book called Vavei HaAmudim. And I'm going to read the Hebrew, and we'll translate as I go along, but you also have this translation here that you can follow along with me. Yesh lahafli hafela ufela, that there is this absolutely tremendous surprise in regards to this issue of defects in regards to priests, mikavanata midrash mashma, that we learn from the midrash, shetashmishu shel kadosh baruch hu bekelim shavurim, that the kadosh baruch hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, uses broken vessels. Ve'im ken kohen ba'al mum yihiyeh kasher lahakrava. And then if this is so, then a kohen who has this defect, who has this blemish, should be fit to offer sacrifices. And we're going to get into a little bit more, but even from the outset here, you have this this notion is brought by the Shla's son, that that someone who has that someone who is considered to be broken, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but someone who's considered to be broken is actually being used by God. That is to say, that the ones who are the most broken among us, the ones who have the most sorrows, the most challenges, that they're the ones who are in many ways used by God and brought by God out into the world, or used by God to make this world the kind of world that God wants it to be. And as such, from that understanding, which we're going to get to a little bit more, it seems that a Kohen who is blemished should be able to sacrifice. But, as we see, umikra malehu befarashat Emor shepsalah haTorah ba'alei mumin lahakrava. But the text actually is full of these verses in Parashat Emor, in our Torah portion, in which the Torah says that these priests who have these defects are not allowed to come and make sacrifices. So how do we resolve these two contradicting issues, that God uses those who are broken and that ones who have defects are not able to come before and make sacrifices? We're going to continue now in the Hebrew in this paragraph, beginning in I don't claim, or in the Hebrew up here. Velo al hamidrash levat telonotai. And it's not just upon this midrash that I brought before you that I make this claim. Ach gam ala gaon maharshal zal. That rather it comes also from the gaon, from the great halachic thinker, the Maharshal, who comes from the 16th century in Poland. Ki hevi b'yam shel Shlomo b'masechet Chulin. He brings in his book known as the Sea of Solomon, because the first name of the Maharshal is Solomon. Oh, and by the way, I made a mistake before that. This book, Vavei Hamudim, was actually published uh, by the Maharshals. Sorry, published published by his son, and not published by his son, and actually written by the Shlah. So that this is actually a book written by the Shlah. And what he writes, what he quotes the Maharshal as saying is Od Ketu B'Tshuvat Maharam, is that it is also written in the Tshuva of the Maharam of Rothenburg. So this is now the Shah quoting Maharshal, quoting Maharam in good rabbinic tradition. Sheshe'elat Adam shepag'a bo midat hadin v'naflu zero'otav, that here we have this question of a person who has been stricken by the aspect of justice and his limbs have fallen from him, i.e. this is the language I mentioned before, that God has in many ways not necessarily punished, but judged someone so unfavorably that his limbs have fallen off or have been removed. Im ra'oi lihiyot shliach tzibor. If someone like that is able to be a prayer leader, someone who's able to get up on the bima and to lead prayers. Pshita de ra'oi v'ra'oihu. Of course it is. Of course it's true that it's appropriate for him to do so, to be a prayer leader. Ve'adraba mitzvah mina muvcharhu. And even the more so, it is actually a choice mitzvah. It is even a more beautiful mitzvah that he does so. Why? Ki melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu, because the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, chafetz lihishtamesh bekelim shavurim, that he desires to use these broken vessels. Velo kederech sharim basar vadam. That means that he uses those who sing in an unusual fashion. Velo kederech, that is not the normal way. Shene emar, lev nishbar v'nidche Elohim lo tevazeh. As it is said in Psalms, you will not despise a broken and contrite heart. De'ein nifsal b'mumin ela kohanim, that the only ones who are invalid are those who are priests, but everyone else is fine. And I think here we have this language of bekelim shavurim, of broken vessels, or of lev nishbar, of a broken heart, that I think is starting to be a way into the conversation around disabilities. That what I think is happening here is that there's a recognition of an innate brokenness in someone who has an ability, or someone who no longer has an ability, or who never had an ability that we would consider to be their right. This is even the more so the case when someone loses a limb, that there are stories of those who believe, who can almost feel their arm even though it's not actually there, that it's almost as if something has been cut off, something has been lost. And to start the conversation around disability without recognizing the sense of loss that is embedded within not having, in this case, a limb that you should have, or in not being able to speak like you should be able to, or not being able to see, is in many ways, if we don't include that in the conversation, then we would be missing out on one of the most important elements of what it means to go through any kind of disability, or to have any kind of disability, which is the need to reconcile a reality that is one in which we have to adapt. So that if you are able to speak, if you are able to see, if you are able to walk, you don't have to adapt any normal kind of behavior. Or I wouldn't say necessarily normal, but you don't have to adapt your behavior from what you would usually be able to do. When we have some disability, we have to find some manner of adapting, and that need to adapt leads us to a place where we might feel that sense of loss. The goal should be that we don't feel that that there's any loss of our humanity, that we are still full and equal human beings, but that in the process of learning how to adapt, we realize that there is a need to, because we have lost something. And yet, in that sense of loss or brokenness, however you want to describe it, is this teaching that God, many ways, prefers that or desires people who have that kind of feeling, because in that feeling, we have a sense that it takes more from someone to offer, whether it's prayers or whether it's words or whether it's just deciding to do a mitzvah. It takes more energy and more effort if you have to adapt, if you have to overcome something. And that's why it's such a choice mitzvah to be able to do. What's more, that the verse that was brought in Psalms, and just to look up one point on this, that verse in Psalms, according to the opinion of Edward Friedman, who wrote the chapter on individuals with disabilities in this great book called The Observant Life, which is a wonderful guidebook for how to use the wisdom of Judaism in today's world, that kind of language is used to describe how someone who has a contrite heart, or who is in many ways disabled in some manner, has received that element of humility, of being humbled, because they're not able to do what they think they should be able to do, and they have to learn to adapt. And that kind of built-in humility is something that God prefers, because one of the points of prayer is for us to humble ourselves before God. So all the more so, someone who has already been humbled should be able to offer those kinds of prayers. So that seems to be, in many ways, a positive element to how we have a need for reconciling the challenges brought about by disabilities in a positive light. That still doesn't change the language of the Torah, that someone who is disabled is not able to be a priest. And such, we're going to continue learning in order to understand a little bit more about why that prohibition exists. Va'ani avo acharav lemalot et divarav. So now this is the Maharshal, who again is being quoted by the Shla, coming back in and saying that I'm going to come and finish the words brought by the Maharam. That this prohibition that he says at the end is that only exists for the priest, deha afilu leviyim, that it should also be included in regards to the Levites. She'avodatan b'shir b'shilo uvet olamim afilu hachi ein nifsalin ela b'kol. And he brings this quote from the Talmud, from Masechet Chulin, page 24a, in which it says that they were only invalidated at Shiloh and in the permanent house because of their voices. He's bringing a quote that basically says that there was a moment in which Levites were invalidated from their roles as Levites, meaning the ones who are in the choir, who sing at the temple, in addition to helping the priests in their general work, that they become invalidated because of their voices, which according to one commentary means that when they lost their voices, they could no longer physically sing in the choir. Kol shekain shaliach tzibur shelanu, ad kan lishon Maharshal. And what he's saying is that all the more so, if the priests who are unable to sing should be invalidated from singing, all the more so our shaliach tzibur, that for someone who ostensibly is not able to sing, should not be able to lead. And what this um, what this gets at is the fact that disabilities also, while we must learn to adapt, the question is, are there certain limitations to what those adaptations can do? So that if I cannot sing, regardless of whether or not I physically can't speak, I'm not going to be able to be in a choir. It's not right for me to be able to do a job that I'm physically unable to do. And perhaps what this understanding as it relates back to our Torah is trying to teach us is that when it comes to a challenge, if you want to call it a defect, or if you want to call a disability, if you want to call a blemish that causes you to be unable to fully accomplish your task in whatever form that is, that you should not go through it, and that we should not rely upon you to be able to have to fulfill that role. That obviously leads to the question, well, what roles are like someone who is deaf, that whether or not that they can be singing in a choir? What are those issues that if you can't sing that you shouldn't be singing in a choir? And what are those issues where if you have some kind of defect on your body that you're unable to perform a ritual even if you are able to adapt to it? In other words, what is the separation between I can adapt to a situation versus I can't adapt to a situation? And I don't think that the Torah was able to really understand the extent to which people could be able to adapt to a situation, but it did want to start out in understanding the fact that if you have something which causes you to be unable to do a job, that you should not be forced to have to do that job. And I think our question for today is, in what sense do we need to help one another, especially those who have physical or mental challenges, be able to adapt and to join into our rituals and join into our communities? How much can we help and how much can we support opening in ourselves to bringing in those who are disabled without the fear that they're going to have to do something that they're unable to do, but rather with the hope that we'll help find the ways in order to be able to make them feel comfortable, to allow those who are physically disabled or mentally challenged to be able to be welcomed so that they can be able to adapt rightly in our community. At what point are we able to eventually have a disabled priest? And that is a challenge I want to lay out, and I want to offer that we should do more in our communities to be able to offer access, to be able to bring those who, whether it's through physical or mental challenges, sometimes struggle, to be able to bring them into our community and to give them the tools to help create the space in order for them to adapt and be full members of our community. And with that, I want to thank you so much for joining, and take care and have a wonderful Shabbat. Bye-bye.